Think about this for a moment. Imagine waking up tomorrow, opening the safe where your family has kept its savings for years, only to discover that overnight, your government has declared that owning gold is now illegal. Not counterfeit gold, not stolen gold, your own gold. The gold you bought with your own money, the gold your grandparents passed down to you. If you refuse to hand it over, you could be fined thousands of dollars or sent to prison. It sounds like something that would happen in a dictatorship, but it didn't. It happened in the United States of America. And for more than 4 decades, millions of Americans were forbidden from owning most forms of gold. The strange part is, almost nobody talks about it today. Schools rarely mention it. History books usually give it only a few sentences. Yet this single decision changed the relationship between the American people, their money, and their government, forever. So, why did America ban gold? Was it really about saving the economy? Or was there another reason hiding beneath the surface? To answer that question, we have to travel back to one of the darkest moments in American history, the Great Depression. In October 1929, the stock market crashed. At first, many Americans believed the crisis would last only a few weeks. They were wrong. Businesses collapsed. Factories shut down. Banks began failing across the country. Within just a few years, thousands of banks had disappeared. Millions of people lost everything they had saved. Families stood in endless bread lines. Farmers abandoned their land. And unemployment reached levels America had never seen before. People stopped trusting banks. Instead, they trusted something they believed could never lose its value: gold. Every day, Americans rushed to banks to exchange paper dollars for gold coins. Others hid their gold inside walls, buried it in backyards, or locked it away where no one could find it. To ordinary people, this made perfect sense. Paper money could lose value. Banks could fail. But gold had survived wars, empires, and economic disasters for thousands of years. Owning gold felt like owning certainty itself. There was only one problem. The more gold people kept at home, the less gold remained inside the banking system. And without enough gold, banks couldn't lend money. Businesses couldn't borrow. The economy slowed even further. Government officials believed the country had entered a dangerous cycle, one that could destroy the entire financial system. Then, everything changed. On March 4, 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became President of the United States. He inherited an economy that was collapsing faster every single day. Banks were closing almost daily. Panic was spreading from city to city. Roosevelt knew he had to act quickly. But nobody expected what happened next. Only weeks after taking office, he signed one of the most controversial executive orders in American history. An order that would make millions of ordinary Americans criminals, simply for gold. Roosevelt's order was called Executive Order 6102. It was signed on April 5, 1933. The message was simple. Every American had to turn in almost all of their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to a Federal Reserve Bank or an authorized bank. The deadline came fast. People had only a few weeks to comply. In exchange, the government paid them $20.67 for every ounce of gold. On paper, it sounded fair, but many Americans couldn't believe what they were hearing. How could a government, built on the idea of private property, suddenly demand that citizens surrender something they legally owned? Some obeyed immediately. Others didn't. Many secretly hid their gold inside walls, under floorboards, inside old furniture, even buried it in farms and forests. Some families never told anyone where their gold was hidden. Those secrets stayed buried for generations. The government wasn't asking politely. If someone knowingly refused to hand over their gold, they could face fines of up to $10,000, an enormous amount of money in 1933, or up to 10 years in prison. For most Americans, the risk simply wasn't worth it. So they handed it over. Truckloads of gold began arriving at banks across the country. Vaults filled with coins, bars, and certificates collected from ordinary citizens. But here's the part that made many people furious. Less than a year later, after the government had collected most of the nation's gold, Congress passed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. And almost overnight, the official price of gold jumped from $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce. That's nearly a 70% increase. To many Americans, it felt like the government had forced them to sell their gold. only to make it far more valuable once it was safely in government hands. Supporters argued it was necessary. They believed increasing the value of gold gave the government more financial power to fight the Great Depression. Critics saw something very different. They believed ordinary citizens had carried the burden, while Washington gained the reward. The debate has never truly ended. Even today, economists still argue over whether Roosevelt saved the American economy, or crossed a line that no government should ever cross. But one thing is certain. The gold ban wasn't just about metal. It was about power. Power over money. Power over banks. And ultimately, power over the economy itself. And what happened next changed America's financial system forever. But the story didn't end in 1934. In fact, America's gold ban would remain in place for more than 40 years. An entire generation grew up believing that owning large amounts of gold was simply against the law. Most people accepted it. Others quietly held on to hidden coins, never telling anyone where they were. Over time, the economy slowly recovered. Factories reopened. Banks became stronger. World War II transformed the United States into an economic superpower. And by the end of the war, America held more gold than almost any other country on Earth. For decades, the US dollar became the center of the global financial system, because foreign governments knew it was backed by America's massive gold reserves. Ironically, the same gold that Americans had been forced to surrender helped strengthen the dollar itself. But by the late 1960s, a new problem appeared. Foreign countries began exchanging their dollars for American gold. America's gold reserves started shrinking once again. The system was becoming impossible to maintain. Then, in 1971, President Richard Nixon made another historic decision. He ended the dollar's direct link to gold. It became known as the Nixon shock. For the first time, the US dollar was no longer backed by gold. Instead, its value depended largely on the strength of the American economy and public confidence. Just 3 years later, in 1974, President Gerald Ford signed a law allowing Americans to legally own gold again. After more than 4 decades, the ban was finally over. Today, you can buy gold coins, gold bars, or invest in gold without breaking the law. But one question still remains. Was Roosevelt right? Supporters argue that his decision prevented the complete collapse of the American economy. Without it, banks might have failed, businesses might never have recovered, and the Great Depression could have lasted much longer. Critics disagree. They believe the government violated one of the most fundamental rights, the right to own private property. To them, the gold ban proved that even in a democracy, governments can claim extraordinary powers during times of crisis. Nearly a century later, people still debate who was right. But one fact cannot be ignored. For more than 40 years, owning gold in the United States could make you a criminal. It's one of the most forgotten chapters in American history. Not because it didn't matter, but because it forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. When a nation faces a crisis, how much freedom are people willing to give up in exchange for stability? History doesn't always repeat itself, but it often leaves behind lessons, waiting for the next generation to notice them. If you enjoyed uncovering this forgotten story, subscribe, because America's history is filled with events that sound impossible until you discover they actually happened.